Welcome back to the Deep Dive. This is where we take a whole stack of sources, pull out those crucial insights, and, well, give you a shortcut to being genuinely informed. Today, we're diving deep into something that's really weighing on, I think, everyone connected to schools right now. Student behavior. It just feels like things haven't quite, snapped back since the pandemic. There's this kind of persistent concern in the air, wouldn't you say?
You've absolutely hit on a critical point there. What's really concerning, maybe even a bit surprising, is that we're multiple years past the full return to school buildings back in fall 2021, and the data. It's showing that student classroom behavior isn't just staying the same, it's getting worse.
Worse. Wow.
Yeah, this isn't just some temporary blip we're talking about. It seems to be a persistent and, honestly, a deepening problem.
And we've got some numbers here that really highlight that. We're looking at a January 8th, 2025 Education Week article. It's based on a survey from late 2024, nearly 1,000 educators. And what they found is, well, it's pretty stark. 72% of educators said students were misbehaving a little or even a lot more than back in fall 2019, pre-pandemic.
72%, that's huge.
It is. But here's the real kicker. That number was 70% in early 2023, and it was 66% back in 2021. So the trend, it's clearly, undeniably going the wrong way.
And, that downward trend creates this huge ripple effect across the whole school. I mean, student misbehavior is routinely topping teachers' lists of concerns, and it ranges, right, from those minor disruptions we can all picture to really serious fights, physical altercations even.
Right.
And it's not just about behavior, what students do. Teachers are also reporting a pretty significant drop in student motivation, and that, understandably, hits staff morale hard.
I can only imagine.
Yeah. Look, the EdWeek Research Center found only 18% of public school teachers are very satisfied with their jobs. That's down from 20% just the year before. And maybe even more telling, a Q Research Center report from April 2024 found 80% of teachers are dealing with behavioral problems at least a few times a week. 80%.
Wow.
And get this, 58%. They say it's happening every single day. It's like a genuine crisis unfolding right there on the front lines.
That really paints a vivid picture, doesn't it?
Yeah.
So, okay, for this deep dive, our mission, I guess, is two things. First, let's really try to unpack why this is happening. Let's go beyond the easy answers. But maybe more importantly, we want to focus on the actual actionable steps schools can take, like this summer, to tackle these challenges effectively. Set themselves up for a much better school year ahead. Okay, let's unpack this thing.
Okay, so our main source for this is Dr. Howie Knoff's June 28, 2025 blog. It's from Project Achieve Educational Solutions, and it's titled School Discipline, Classroom Management, and Student Self-Management: The Summer Preparations Needed for Excellence This Fall. And Knopf, well, he's incredibly direct right out of the gate. He basically says students are not going to fix themselves.
Blunt.
Very. He really pushes back against just blaming external stuff, parents, pandemic trauma, cell phones, social media. He says that's unproductive. And he's also pretty critical of relying on, quick fixes. He even points out that established frameworks like SEL, that's social emotional learning, and PBIS, positive behavioral interventions and supports, well, they haven't totally solved this pervasive problem we're seeing either.
So the usual suspects aren't cutting it.
Seems not. His core idea is that we need to look deeper, more strategically.
Okay, so if schools want to open successfully this coming fall, Knopf argues they have to proactively address 5 critical areas. And he stresses they're interdependent, like pillars holding something up. These are quality instruction, discipline and classroom management, multi-tiered services and supports, staff cohesion and collaboration, and school climate and student engagement.
Exactly. It's not about picking one. They all have to work together. And Knopf sees the summer months not just as, a break, but as this unique and invaluable opportunity. A time for reflection, strategic planning, skill development. He frames it pretty starkly, actually. It's a choice for school leaders: preparation versus procrastination, systematic improvement versus wishful thinking, investing in summer planning versus accepting the status quo this fall. It's a real call to action.
A call to action for proactive change. And the ultimate goal of all this planning and work, he says it's to teach students, right from preschool all the way through high school, the social, emotional, and behavioral self-management skills they need, not just for school, but for their future success too. Things like interpersonal skills, social problem solving, conflict resolution, emotional awareness, self-control, communication, coping skills. It's really about equipping them for life.
Yeah, life skills, which raises a really important question. How do you take these, evidence-based ideas, these blueprints, and actually make them work effectively in our real school? Knopf brings in this great analogy from former Speaker of the House, Tip O'Neill. All politics is local.
Ah, I know that one.
Right. O'Neill meant that national policies have to actually work for local communities. Knopf applies that straight to education. He says any blueprint for school discipline has to be individualized for every single local school and district. His point is, one size fits all just doesn't cut it in education because contexts are so diverse.
Yeah.
He uses this fantastic analogy about gloves. Yeah, like some schools need warm gloves, maybe for a nurturing environment. Others need sturdy work gloves for different challenges. And some might need a completely different size glove than the school just down the road. It really highlights that need for tailored solutions.
That makes a lot of sense. So we talk about the deeper goals of effective school discipline. What does that look like? For students, it's about getting them to high levels of social, emotional, behavioral competence.
Yeah.
All those skills we mentioned, plus critical thinking, and really being engaged academically.
Right. And for the staff, it boils down to them being highly effective in their instruction and classroom management and feeling confident that they can figure out why a student might be struggling and actually implement things that work.
And then for the school itself.
The goals are things like a positive climate, obviously fewer discipline problems, having good consultative resources available, getting parents and the community involved, and ultimately seeing high student success that leads to graduation and positive options after high school. It's this really holistic vision, you see.
It really is.
Yeah.
Okay, let's dive deep now into those 5 critical interdependent components that the research points to. Knopf calls them the macro system. Schools need to evaluate this summer, usually led by a school discipline committee, right?
Exactly. Let's start with component 1, positive school and classroom climate, and staff and peer relationships. Knopf makes the point that anyone who's been in a toxic environment knows just how devastating it is for learning, behavior, attitudes, mental health, everything.
Absolutely.
So his insight is that effective schools don't just, hope for a positive climate. They actively, consciously build it. And they work constantly to sustain positive, inclusive relationships for everyone, students and staff, always thinking about things like gender, race, culture, socioeconomic status, family background. It's got to be intentional.
And building relationships, like you said, isn't just some vague idea. It takes real-time, specific training, commitment, consistent practice from everyone.
Yeah.
Students need to be explicitly taught the social skills for positive relationships. And, this is key, the peer groups have to kind of buy into this positive culture.
That's crucial. And it's not just on the kids. Teachers also have to commit to really effective communication and collaboration among themselves to make it work.
So what does the research say we should look for when evaluating climate?
Well, there are several strong variables. Things like mutual respect, value, trust, social connectedness, then physical and emotional safety, support, and just basic availability. Also, open communication, collaboration, getting feedback, being responsive, strong classroom management, fairness, equity, giving students voice, engagement, belonging, autonomy, and finally, genuine cultural and student diversity awareness and responsiveness. These aren't just buzzwords, they're things you can actually look at and measure in a school.
What's so useful here is Knopf provides these practical evaluation questions for leaders on this component. They're not abstract. They really push you to look at, are your efforts intentional? Is equity really happening? What's the actual quality of relationships? Are kids learning the skills? What about staff capacity? Student perceptions? Is student voice actually heard? It's like a practical roadmap for checking yourself. Okay, that leads us nicely into component 2. Explicit prosocial behavioral expectations and social, emotional, and behavioral skills instruction. This is where Knopf argues for a really critical shift. Instead of just telling kids what not to do, the focus has to be on explicitly teaching them what to do.
Yes, proactive teaching.
He gives great examples, like instead of don't run in the hallway, teach walk down the hallway. Instead of don't blurt out answers, teach raise your hand with your mouth quiet. It changes the whole frame.
That clarity is just so vital. We need behaviorally specific expectations, things you can actually see and do. A really common mistake, though understandable, is relying on vague ideas, like just telling kids to be respectful, responsible, polite, safe, trustworthy.
Sounds good on a poster.
Right, but what does responsible actually look like to a first grader and older students? They might interpret those words way differently than the staff intends. Think about teaching bus rules. Instead of behave on the bus, you teach the specific steps. Walk quietly onto the bus. Sit in the first open seat. Talk quietly with your neighbors. That kind of clarity makes a world of difference.
Knopf uses this really powerful analogy that sticks with you. He says teaching social skills is like a basketball coach teaching plays.
Ah,
You don't just yell, "Play good defense." You teach specific steps. You demonstrate, you have them practice in drills like role plays with feedback, and then you help them apply it in the actual game, the real-world situation. And this same approach applies to teaching things like social problem solving, emotional awareness, self-control, communication, coping skills. You build competence through practice.
and a really key piece here is who does the teaching. Knopf argues that general education teachers should lead the core social skill instruction.
Why them specifically?
Well, think about it. They know their students best, right? They have way more opportunities throughout the day to reinforce these skills. Plus, these skills are fundamental for their own classroom management, and they can weave them right into academic lessons.
Makes sense. So where do the specialists fit in? Counselors, psychologists?
Right. They provide the more intensive Tier 2 or Tier 3 instruction. Their role is crucial, but it supplements the classroom learning. They help ensure that skills learned in, say, a counseling group actually transfer back to the hustle and bustle of the classroom, which is where students really need them.
So what does this look like day to day? Knopf's evaluation questions for leaders here focus on things like, are you using positive phrasing? Are expectations clear? How are skills integrated? Are there practice opportunities? Are interventions consistent? Is the reinforcement in the moment? Staff training? How do you track progress? It really makes you think about embedding this stuff.
Okay, next up, component 3, student motivation and accountability, because even students who have the social skills still need the motivation to use them consistently. Knopf points out this real-world tension. The peer group might be saying, be cool, don't try too hard, while the teachers are saying, focus on school. That's where school-wide accountability becomes absolutely essential.
And when we say accountability, we're not just talking punishment, right?
yeah.
It's about having meaningful incentives and consequences and making sure they're consistently reinforced.
Exactly. It's crucial for everyone, really, for the kids who have the skills but maybe lack motivation, and also for those whose inappropriate behavior might actually be getting reinforced, maybe by peers or something else. It's about creating a clear system that guides behavior choices.
And a critical tool for this, Knopf says, is the behavioral matrix. What is that exactly?
It's basically a school-wide tool. Ideally, staff and even students create it together. It formalizes the behavioral standards, lays out the positive responses, and clearly defines different intensity levels of inappropriate behavior, linking each level to specific predictable consequences. It just makes the rules of the game totally transparent.
Okay, let's break down those 4 intensity levels he talks about. They seem like a really clear guide.
They are. So intensity annoying, think mild disruptions, a bit of fidgeting, a quiet side chat. The teacher handles this with minimal interaction, a nonverbal cue, maybe walking closer, a quick look, just a swift, subtle redirection.
Got it. Low key. What's intensity 2?
Intensity 2 is disruptive or interfering. This is more frequent or longer-lasting disruption. Here, the teacher uses a corrective response plus a classroom consequence, maybe losing points, missing a privilege briefly, a quick call home. But here's the crucial part. The student must then positively practice the appropriate behavior at least 3 times right afterward. It's about correction and immediately reinforcing the right way.
Correction plus practice.
Yeah.
Okay. Intensity 3.
Intensity 3 is persistently disruptive or antisocial. Now we're talking significant ongoing disruption or maybe explicit antisocial acts. This usually means an out-of-classroom response is needed, like timeout in another room, maybe an accountability room, or an office referral. There's still a consequence involving the classroom teacher and often some kind of restorative payback, an apology, cleaning up a mess they made. But here's a really critical distinction Knopf makes. If it seems like this behavior isn't just a discipline issue, but maybe stems from an underlying social, emotional, or behavioral problem, that warrants a simultaneous referral to the multi-tiered services team, the MTSS folks, for a deeper look at the root cause.
Okay. That's a key fork in the road. And intensity 4?
Intensity 4 is severe or dangerous. These are the extreme behaviors, antisocial, damaging, dangerous things, usually spelled out in the student code of conduct. This means an immediate administrative referral that could lead to a parent conference, suspension, maybe even expulsion. Often there's restitution and positive practice involved afterward too. But again, that critical question, could this be rooted in a deeper social or emotional problem? If so, an MTSS referral should happen alongside the disciplinary action. Because while the discipline might be necessary for safety, it won't motivate long-term change if there's a root cause issue, only targeted services will do that.
That distinction feels incredibly important.
It really is. And the power of evaluating behavior against these clear, agreed-upon standards in the matrix is that responses become consistent and predictable for students. Over time, that predictability fosters responsibility. Kids learn the direct link between actions and outcomes.
Anoff also mentions some key evidence-based strategies here, like aiming for, 5 positive interactions for every negative one?
That's the goal, yeah, the 5.1 ratio. And really emphasizing positive, incentive-based motivation whenever possible. Using the mildest consequence that will actually work. Focusing on consequences that motivate change, not just punishments that temporarily stop behavior. And always including that positive practice piece after a consequence.
And differentiating between kids who lack the skill versus those who lack the motivation.
Exactly. Skill deficit versus performance deficit. They need different approaches. And this brings up an important point about motivation itself. Knopf is clear. Educators can only create motivating conditions. You can't actually force a student to meet expectations.
Right, you can lead a horse to water.
Precisely. And if adults only manage behavior with external controls and never teach the self-management skills, what happens when the adult isn't there? The student won't manage themselves. The goal has to be internal discipline, not just external compliance.
And a really smart way to boost motivation is involving students in peer groups in actually designing the motivational programs.
Yes, because then the incentives are more likely to be genuinely meaningful to them. And it helps prevent negative peer pressure from undermining the whole thing. If they help build it, they have more ownership.
Makes sense. And Knopf has evaluation questions for leaders on this too, right?
Yeah.
Covering clarity, differentiating deficits, mild consequences, the 5.1 ratio, student involvement, MTSs, referrals, consistency, restorative practices. It's about building a system that really works.
Exactly, which leads perfectly into component 4, consistency and fidelity.
Ah, the linchpins. Knopf says consistency isn't like software you just download, right?
No, it develops through experience over time. And it has to be consciously, deliberately maintained. That takes strategic planning, clear communication, active collaboration, and real consensus among all the staff.
And consistency isn't just a general idea. It has to apply across the first 3 components.
Absolutely. Consistent positive relationships, consistent behavioral expectations in teaching, and consistent incentives and consequences. Component 1, 2, and 3. And it has to be consistent across all settings in the school, in all situations, and with all different peer groups. It needs to be pervasive.
Because inconsistency,
Right.
well, that's poison, right?
Right.
Students feel treated unfairly. They might get manipulative or just emotionally check out.
Totally undermines everything. It erodes motivation, accountability, all the good work you're trying to do.
And then there's fidelity. What does that mean exactly?
Fidelity just means implementing the plan the way it was designed, consistently, accurately. Knopf stresses that even the best plan will fail without proper, consistent training and, importantly, accountability for actually doing it. He's quite blunt about it. Lack of fidelity will undermine and eventually doom any initiative. You have to do what you say you're going to do every single time.
So the evaluation questions here push leaders to look at system-wide application, student perceptions of fairness, sustained implementation, equity, feedback loops, shared understanding of fidelity. Making sure the wheels don't fall off the bus, basically.
Pretty much. Which brings us to the final piece. Component 5, special situations and multi-tiered services and supports. This component acknowledges that some situations are just inherently more complex, and they often require a really robust multi-tiered system of supports, that MTSS framework, to be addressed effectively. Knopf flags 3 special situations.
Okay. What's the first one?
Special situation 1 is multiple settings. Think about common areas. Hallways, bathrooms, buses, the cafeteria, the playground. They're just more complex than a single classroom.
Right. More kids, different ages, less supervision.
Exactly. More multi-age students, different kinds of interactions, less direct supervision usually, and different peer pressures. So students need specific teaching on how to adapt their social and emotional skills for each of those unique areas. And the staff supervising those areas, they need specific training too, so they can respond fairly and consistently to all the different students in those often chaotic spaces.
Okay, common areas. What's the second special situation?
Special situation 2, peer groups as psychosocial influencers. Knopf highlights a stark reality here. For many students, especially adolescents, the peer group is often a more dominant social and emotional force than adults are.
That rings true.
So, school approaches have to deliberately work to make sure peers act as positive models, not negative ones. This means explicitly teaching students skills to prevent and respond to things like teasing, taunting, bullying, harassment, hazing, physical aggression, and crucially, teaching bystander intervention strategies how to safely step in and help someone else. The goal is stopping negative interactions and breaking that cycle where victims might retaliate. And notice, most of this stuff happens in those common areas we just talked about.
So situations 1 and 2 overlap quite a bit.
They really do. Now, special situation 3. Misbehavior due to personal history circumstances. This one is absolutely critical for everyone in a school to understand.
Yeah.
Knopf emphatically states that some misbehavior is not just a discipline problem. It stems from deeper underlying social, emotional, behavioral, or even mental health issues. Think about potential triggers or causes. Physical or biological problems, diagnosed mental health conditions, disabilities, significant stress or trauma, maybe a dysfunctional home life, poverty, substance abuse, the list goes on.
So it's not just kids choosing to act out.
Not always, no. And his point is, disciplinary actions alone are highly unlikely to solve these underlying problems. What's needed here are those multi-tiered services, strategic Tier 2 or intensive Tier 3 support. These interventions have to be guided by a student support team and based on assessments that actually try to figure out the root cause of the behavior. Staff need to learn how to tell the difference between a straightforward discipline issue and behavior that signals a deeper need.
That sounds challenging.
It is, but it's vital. Even if a student commits a serious intensity 3 or 5 infraction that needs administrative action, Knopf says a student support team assessment should still be considered simultaneously. Because while discipline might be necessary for safety and order in that moment, it's not going to motivate long-term change if the behavior is rooted in trauma or a mental health challenge. Only targeted, empathetic services will address the root cause.
So the evaluation questions for this whole component cover expectations in common areas, staff training, addressing peer influence, bystander strategies, ensuring the MTSS is robust, distinguishing willful misconduct from root cause behavior, doing functional assessments, and monitoring discipline for effectiveness and equity. It's about making sure no kid falls through the cracks because their struggles are misunderstood.
Precisely. So after laying out all 5 components, Knopf shifts gears to the practical side. Who does what? How does this actually play out? He starts with a really critical principle for behavior management. The grade or instructional team level is the least common denominator in a school.
The least common denominator. What does he mean by that?
Basically, everyone on a teaching team has to be pulling in the same direction. Because inconsistency, even from just one staff member on that team, can subtly but powerfully undermine the whole school-wide system you're trying to build. Unity is key at that team level.
Okay, that makes sense. So where does that leave individual classroom teachers?
Knopf makes a great point here. Effective classroom management isn't really about having some magic personality. It's about consistent practice. Specifically, how well a teacher establishes appropriate authority and fosters genuine cooperation.
Authority and cooperation, how do they do that?
Well, teachers establish accountability through clarity, consistency, and compassion. That means clearly defining and teaching expectations right from day one. Establishing predictable routines, using positive, specific language, modeling the behavior you want to see.
Like walking the walk.
Exactly. Regularly acknowledging good behavior, applying consequences calmly, fairly predictably, and always following up with positive practice of the correct behavior. Using low-level, subtle strategies first. And critically, maintaining student dignity. No sarcasm, no yelling. And Knopf also stresses that strong, engaging instruction itself is a huge part of good management. If kids are engaged, they're less likely to misbehave.
Right. And how do they build the cooperation side?
Through relationships and inclusion. Taking a genuine personal interest, greeting kids at the door, using their names, learning a bit about their lives. Having equitable, positive interactions with all students, making eye contact, moving around the room, reinforcing contributions, giving kids chances to lead, and patiently giving everyone time to think and speak, making sure all voices feel valued.
So when accountability and cooperation are balanced,
Teachers spend way less time managing behavior and way more time focused on learning. It's a real win-win.
And there are evaluation areas for teachers too, right? Covering clear expectations, routines, active supervision, that 5.1 positive ratio, respectful discipline, helping kids manage themselves, building relationships, engaging instruction, safe environments. A kind of self-check for teachers.
Exactly. Now, what about the related services and support staff? Your counselors, psychologists, social workers, special ed teachers.
Yeah, where do they fit in this model?
Knoff argues that in today's really complex classrooms, these specialists aren't just nice to have, they're absolutely essential. Their crucial role is blending direct student intervention, working with kids one-on-one, or in groups with indirect consultative services to teachers.
So working with kids and supporting the teachers who work with those kids every day.
Precisely. That dual approach is key to making sure the skills a student learns in, say, a counseling session, actually transfer and get used in the regular classroom environment. That's where the rubber meets the road.
And Knopf outlines specific skills these professionals need. What are they?
He lists 7 key areas. First, clear communication and empathy. That means really listening first, avoiding jargon, being culturally responsive.
Makes sense.
Second, patience, flexibility, and creativity. Understanding change takes time, being able to adapt strategies to unique kids and situations, handling setbacks calmly. Third, leadership, consultation, and collaboration. Not just having the title, but actively supporting teachers in their classrooms, working side by side with everyone involved. Fourth, culturally responsive and trauma-informed practice. Understanding how behavior might connect to cultural norms or past trauma, helping kids feel safe, and importantly, training teachers on these perspectives too.
That's huge.
Fifth, data-driven problem solving. Using that systematic process. Identify the problem, figure out the root cause, design an intervention based on that, and monitor progress, making sure interventions target the why. Sixth, expertise in evidence-based interventions. Having a deep toolbox of proven strategies, things like positive reinforcement, CBT, social skills training, self-management techniques, trauma-focused therapy, and so on.
And the last one.
Finally, number 7 is ongoing support and follow-through, basically being there for the long haul, ensuring interventions are done with fidelity, checking if they're actually working, making adjustments, celebrating small wins, and collaborating closely so teachers don't feel like they're handling complex issues all alone.
Wow, that's a comprehensive skill set.
It really is. And the evaluation questions for leaders focus on ensuring that blend of direct and indirect services, the quality of communication, the patience, the consultation skills, cultural responsiveness, data use, intervention expertise, and the support systems for these vital staff members.
So, okay, let's bring this all together. Dr. Knopf's final call to action.
Yeah.
It really comes back to the summer, doesn't it?
It does. He powerfully reiterates that these summer months aren't just downtime. They're this unique, invaluable opportunity for strategic preparation. He emphasizes how all these components, these discussions, the evaluation questions, they provide these research-proven templates for school leaders to really dig in, assess their strengths, honestly identify weaknesses, and figure out exactly what needs to change for the upcoming year.
And the point isn't just the assessment. It's translating those findings into real strategic action.
Exactly. Knopf states pretty clearly that purposeful summer planning leads directly to significantly stronger student outcomes, greater professional confidence, and enhanced job satisfaction for educators come fall. It's about investing proactively to reap the rewards later, being proactive, not just reactive.
So ultimately, if we as educators, parents, communities really embrace this kind of intentional preparation, if we truly empower students with the skills and the support they need, and if we equip our educators to guide them with real expertise and confidence, well, what new heights of learning, and maybe just as importantly, what new depths of personal growth and self-management might we actually see emerge from our schools? We invite you, the listener, to think about what this deep dive means for your own understanding of what it takes to build truly effective, supportive, and dynamic learning environments.